Yeah.
Notes.
Hi. And
Hello.
welcome to the Footnotes podcast. This is episode 24, I think. Yes.
Wow.
Amazing. 24 weeks. I'm not going to start every podcast with that same line, but good to see you, June. It's been
Yeah.
a good reading week of mine and not yours, but I'm very relaxed and ready to go back to the usual grind.
Amazing.
Yeah, what have you been up to?
Oh, what have I been up to?
Yeah.
Well, actually, this week's been pretty interesting. So we started off the week watching a documentary about Partners in Health, which is
Yes.
an organization started by Dr. Paul Farmer.
Bending the art.
And yes, Bending the Arc, and Jim Yong Kim, and they've gone to do many, wonderful things. Jim Yong Kim served as the president of the World Bank a few years ago, and Paul Farmer is still doing his, major global health work throughout the developing world. So really cool story, really cool documentary. This part that stood out to me the most was that Paul Farmer, before starting med school at Harvard, he was 23 or something, just flew over to Haiti, and then just tried to get a job there because he wanted to work there because he had worked with the Haitian people before, picking oranges at an orange farm. So, that was really inspirational moment of the week. Maybe if you stick to something for 40 something years, you can do a lot of good.
Yeah.
So
Does
that
that inspire you to like for ideas for your when you're off, when you're exploring?
yeah, I mean, one of the things that Partners in Health is, so it started in Haiti, it expanded to Peru, South America. It's now doing a lot of work in Rwanda and a lot of Rwanda, Sierra Leone, a lot of African nations, to help build healthcare systems from the ground up. And one of its most latest projects will be happening in Canada with the Anishinaabe Nation in Northern Ontario, and their aim is to provide high quality healthcare that in partnership with the people there, not just flying in and dropping supplies and then leaving. Partners in Health is the fundamental idea is partnership and accompaniment, and not to say here's some money or funding or budgets with earmarks, so you have to report to us everything you do. Not kind of that. It's a very different idea. So Paul Farmer also shows a lot of the fuck you kind of mentality when faced with different situations. So I could tell you this one story. So when they were starting tuberculosis treatment in Peru, because that was one of the infectious diseases that they were taking care of, they were running across a strain, very difficult cases, and they kept wondering like why these treatments that had worked in Haiti weren't working in Peru all of a sudden, and they had found out that it was actually multi-drug resistant tuberculosis that was developing and spreading in Peru. So according to the WHO, the guidelines at the time was it is too expensive, way too expensive to treat, and way too complex for developing healthcare systems to follow in low resource settings. So the guidelines was you can't treat it, but and these developing healthcare systems apparently really follow the WHO guidelines to a T, and their officials get very upset if you try to fuck around with it, because that's kind of all they have, and that's their kind of like main source of authority, if you could imagine, in a developing world kind of. But Paul Farmer and Jim Yong Kim and the rest of the PIH team who are there are seeing the day-to-day realities of there are sick patients, they are dying, we know how to treat them, but the government won't let us. So what do? They say, fuck you, this is not right. And they start basically smuggling in tuberculosis drugs Uh, there's a really funny moment in the film where Jim Young Kim is like, "Yeah, I would go back to Harvard or the surrounding hospitals in Boston, ask colleagues to give whatever they have, to him. He would pack it all up in just like a suitcase and stuff, and then he would go over and it was him that was traveling because at that time, or probably even now, they thought the Asians were just tourists and
Yeah.
they weren't unlikely to carry over anything sketchy around. So that's how they brought all these drugs into Peru, and they started by treating one of a health celebrity in Peru. Kind of his daughter had multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, so they cured her of that, and then got other patients on similar, very complex, very difficult to follow treatment regimens, and the outcomes, the survival rates, the cure rates were just as better at, if not even better than what you would expect in Canada or in Boston, because of their commitment, because of their use and dedication to community health workers. So, all in all, very inspiring. Very fuck the system, go out there and do what you think needs to be done.
Yeah, I watched it like 3 months ago, I think. But some of the messages still ring through. What I'm really kind of surprised by is that they didn't really get in trouble for smuggling drugs out of the country. From what I understand, they actually gained data from doing that, and then used that to prove the fact that this was sustainable and that this was an effective way of addressing the tuberculosis problem. So
yeah,
that's kind of interesting that they were sort of excused because the outcome was so good.
Yeah, in those tricky situations, you do first, and then you apologize later if you need to.
Yeah.
I'm sure if they had been caught during that time, there might have been legal repercussions, but you can't argue with what they did. And by this point, I don't think the government of Peru will necessarily seek them out for helping them develop a multi-drug resistant tuberculosis program and bringing healthcare to Peru. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's some cynical or evil forces behind not providing these drugs to a developing nation, and maybe it took this sort of campaigner, this champion, to sort of show people that this is something that we should be doing, that this is something that is needed, despite Peru being a totally different country somewhere else in the world. They sort of globalize this idea, or further globalize the idea of health, and they did it just as almost like frontline workers, which is amazing to see, right? They're not policymakers or anything like that. They went on to become more influential people, I suppose, in the systems, but they just started out as being, I don't know, medical students and healthcare providers, which is awesome.
Right, of course. And they see something that needed to be changed, that they had the knowledge to make better, and they said, we're going to do it. And every time there's resistance with the existing institutions, existing dogmas, ingrained ways of thinking, saying we can't possibly treat those kind of complex patients. It's too expensive, doesn't make sense from a cost effectiveness point of view. And what's really frustrating about that is that there's a difference between cost and the price of something. So the true cost of something, so let's say the tuberculosis drugs, the cost of something can be brought really down. Like how much raw resources and energy and time would it take to make and distribute those kind of medications? I don't know, it wouldn't be a small amount, but according to like market conditions, that true cost can be like extremely inflated, based on patents and like the ways that drug companies work, and the prices, as you probably know, and as many people know, can be extremely exaggerated. But if there is a will to lower that cost in order to deliver that treatment towards a wider audience of people, then you can get the cost down. So what they did was they looked to see if the patents on these medications had expired. And yes, they had for like 5 years. So what they could do at that point is to make a deal with a generic manufacturer in the country to produce that drug for much, much, much lower price, like maybe 10,000% cheaper than how they would have acquired it in the States. So, it seems very complex, but it can also be boiled down to like, what do you value more? Like if you value profit, if you value cost effectiveness, and you don't care about poor people, the answer is yeah, this is simply too cost,
Cost inefficient.
Yeah, cost inefficient. Yeah, but like you have those justifications without knowing where that's coming from, without knowing the underlying values that are, espousing them. But if you come from a place of, hey, there are sick and dying people in front of me, and I need to get these resources to them, then I don't know, things become a lot simpler.
And maybe that's like a lesson in money as well, like an economy. I always forget that money is nothing without the value behind it, right? We place value in a lot of things, and that's how like investments work. That's how a lot of like stock market, how that works is people have faith or belief in the value of something, and that's what changes the cost and price of things. And
we can talk about that a little bit more, because like if you start thinking about that, it's kind of crazy. Like the structures of the world and the world economy, like everything depends on like what humans value, and like what we value more than others. So if there's a restructuring of values, then it can be a restructuring of, I don't know, everything.
Of the economy, of the systems, of politics, of like even geography, or how buildings are built, or the sustainability of the technologies we have. There's so many things that can be changed through advocacy, which is something that we often sort of brush off, because I think you said this at some point, it's just a bunch of people yelling at each other, and whoever yells louder sort of has the upper hand. Yeah, it's a crazy idea. We could theoretically flip the world if everyone were to just change their mind all of a sudden.
If only it were that easy.
Well, just at the snap. That'd be miraculous. I'm curious. I think I've spent a lot of time trying to cultivate my own values, and trying to figure out what is important to me. And I know that you've done the same, but something that I've never really thought of, and you kind of bring this up, is like, what are the values that we as a society have, or the community around us? Like what are the values that people uphold, and how is that expressed through day-to-day life, as well as big movements like with policies and with technological advancements and stuff like that? I can't seem to wrap my head around it. I think it's very heterogeneous, but there's got to be a few unifying elements that sort of drive us forward.
Well, yeah, like this is a huge question, but I have like some like a few thoughts on it, like a few examples. So imagine that for something you value most, you will dedicate the most amount of resources towards it, right? So, for example, like the Egyptians, why did they build like these huge pyramid structures that took, hundreds of years of investments in labor and in, I don't know, raw materials and planning and execution, because they valued, whatever mythological symbolic system that was associated with the pyramids and the building of the pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
The leaders probably valued that to the highest degree. Or you see like these magnificent churches in Europe or even
Mm-hmm.
around Canada, that are like these huge, gorgeous, most beautiful places. Like, why do people spend so much time and energy on that? It's like because they value what it represents. So you think about, okay, so what are the projects and enterprises that our society spend, I don't know, like the most amount of money and resources and planning on?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, to be cynical, all I can think about is like giant shopping malls. So a kind of value of capital and material exchange of material goods,
Mm.
and this like underlying consumer culture. Um, yeah, so maybe these beautiful giant shopping malls are modern day churches where we praise the gods of commerce and capitalism and uh, you know endless consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cynical take on it, but do you have some other examples you could think of?
Well, I'm trying to pick that apart too, because um, so what is it about shopping malls that attracts people and makes them value that whole system? Like, is it the acquisition of luxury items? Is it the acquisition of items that make your life easier? Like, it's a complicated idea. Like, what do people actually want? What are the goods and services that people want? And I'm sure this is something that like businesses are always trying to figure out. But maybe it all boils down to maybe um, satisfying your fundamental needs. Maybe it's trying to not be hungry all the time, trying to have a delicious meal. Maybe it's an appeal to sex. Maybe
For
people
sure.
want to be satisfied sexually or with some sort of sexual interest. Maybe people are just trying to not be bored. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe you could be reductionist and say like that's all it is. People just value whatever satisfies the most basic instinct.
hmm Um, I yeah, like food. Um, Food sells, sex sells. They play, good music. Yep, it's very spacious, well lit spaces. Lots of people congregate. So there's a lot of elements are there that humans are really attracted to, but
Mhm.
they're in kind of like a perverse and suboptimal way, right? It's the purpose isn't to really give lasting satisfaction to the people who visit there, although it can, for certain purchases. The main purpose is to drive that transaction, is to make the consumer open his wallets and pay however money to whatever shopping experience they pay for.
Mhm.
And here's one idea, like a lot of so one of the values of our culture is individualism and individual freedom, and that in itself I think is a great idea. But where it gets kind of distorted is in a kind of consumer culture. So you have all these, like, I don't know, clothing lines, and even like Apple and Samsung that kind of espouses that message, saying be different, be unique. um, the way you can be different and unique is by purchasing our different clothes and and showing that off to other people.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really weird, like, it's a weird sell, because that's they're not. I don't think the core intention is to help everyone become these distinct people. I think there's a lot of kind of a history behind that of companies when they're selling to when they target certain demographics, and when they have like certain like tightly regulated, let's say, demographics and an audience to sell things to, like it makes their job much easier and makes it more effective, right? So if you can identify a demographic of young people, let's say let's call them hipsters, then you can like design and pump out the products that hipster demographic would like, and you also help reinforce that kind of identity, that kind of group identity, by pumping out these products. So there's this weird interaction between like the consumers and the marketers. The consumers are kind of self-organizing, forming their own groups. The marketers identify that and kind of help that group kind of polarize into its own by feeding them and selling them what they think they would want and what that group responds to. So it's like it's very fascinating, like consumer psychology and how marketing has, through the like be yourself, express yourself movement, like conveniently grouped people off into different demographic groups to make the selling easier. Right? There was a more legit article on that's giving me kind of the inspiration for this rant. And so one of the other cool things I heard, I was watching a show called Queer Eye,
Okay.
and it's a show where those old shows where like these home improvement guys go in and like completely fix up a person's home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is that on steroids. It's like it's a like all-star team of like 5 gay dudes, and they're like, one specializes in like fitness and food, one specializes in fashion, one specializes in like self-confidence, body image, like blah blah blah, like and like renovations. So it's like a Avengers kind of team going in and like just changing someone's outlook on life and like their home and like their mindset and everything. So that was super cool to see. But what one of the fashion people said about this guy's style, this kind of sort of depressed, very self-deprecating guy who was featured on the show, what he said to him was, yeah, like when you wear what you're wearing, it looks like the clothes are wearing you. You aren't wearing the clothes. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, how can the clothes be wearing you? And I think that rings back to the idea of like you're wearing that just because, I don't know, it was marketed to you as like, yeah, oh, that is something that someone of your demographic should wear. Right? It's because like style and fashion, as we've discussed, can be a means of expressing what is in the inside.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not attentive, if you're the clothes can wear you. And you see those posts on subtle Asian traits or something like that, where everyone in like Asian friend group is wearing those Adidas sweatshorts and like a black tee and a black hat or something. And it's like, yeah, that's not exactly you. The clothes are wearing you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I'm not saying I'm any better of a fashion expert or express myself like particularly well in those means, but I think it's a really funny kind of way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if like a part of that is also people not taking responsibility for their own identity, or maybe not knowing how to do it, and just taking what is fed to them. I mean, I was guilty of this when I was younger. Like many kids, my mom dressed me, but my mom dressed me for like 19 years. So I didn't really have a chance to develop my individuality until I sort of stepped out of it. But there's a certain level of comfort being in that zone where, you know, things are just kind of given to you, things are provided to you, and you just have to like take it. Basically, it's its own little heaven. And I feel like a lot of industries are trying to leverage that, because when you think of entertainment, you know, entertainment is made so it's as easy as possible to consume for you and still brings the most amount of pleasure. I feel like things like alcohol, that is, for me, it's uh, such a terrible market, in my opinion, because it's such an easy way to feel good about yourself. It's such an easy way to, um, you know, let loose and enjoy your time. But it comes with so many negative health effects that are never discussed, that are never really advertised, because, you know, of course, it wouldn't sell. But because it's so easy, you know, alcohol, the markets are doing a hell of a job of selling it. And the branding of alcohol, if you look at it, the way that it's made, the how attractive it is, and, you know, even the color of the alcohol or the bottle and things like that, all of those things, uh, it's it's not very good. I mean, they're changing the laws on cigarettes, right? Like, you can't make your cigarette packs attractive anymore. They have to have a certain proportion that is dedicated to warning labels. And I feel like we should make the same move for alcohol, although I feel like people are a lot more reticent towards that. Um, Even with marijuana, which has been legalized now, like the packaging and the advertising is very, very, very strict. And these are baby steps, of course. But um, I guess the whole thesis of that is to say, you know, there are people out there that are telling us what we should value. That's for certain. And it's becoming even easier and easier for these people to tell us what we should value, especially with improvements in marketing strategies, with advancements in social media technology. Um, and so I guess this is like the classic, you know, stay woke sheeple, you know, like
Yeah.
there's forces at hand that we don't see that are influencing us every day.
Yeah. Not to mention, like, we now have, artificial intelligence, capturing data on, every single click and
Yeah.
and maybe even our voices to an extent on our and our all our consumer choices are being fed into this learning algorithm to kind of reinforce a certain kind of identity. So yeah, I mean, we talked about this crisis in identity, a few weeks ago, and when there's a deep deep need for a sense of identity, then I guess the selling of values and the selling of identity becomes, yeah, so profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that through clothing or through targeted advertising and other means, it's very powerful. And if you're not alert to it, you may very quickly find yourself becoming, you know, one of the herd. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily your fault. You're just seeking identity and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the easiest way is to consume what everyone else around you is consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think there's been a huge backlash to that, as people become more aware of kind of the bullshit of the, like, market economy that we've set up so far. Like, it's great in certain aspects. It's great in, like, widely distributing food, and we don't have hunger as a fundamental problem
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I'm actually, you can't really say that in North America, but for a good amount of the population, but there are other deep needs that are not being filled.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is also like largely a personality thing. A lot of people are very agreeable or don't question these kind of things, and so just follow the herd. And I guess it works out for them. Like they're not having big problems in their life, I don't think. But it feels like the people who recognize it and um, who get tired of being told what they should like, they end up going to a place where they get to dictate what they like, and what happens as a result is that people follow that. Like you look at Steve Jobs, right? He sort of took his own route in innovation with his iPhone and all those products, and like he ended up selling these. Like his mission at the very end was to force his brand or to put out his brand and make it different than everyone else. Like you take a look at the iPhone designs now, like there's no USB port or there's no like there's no headphone jack. Like that's value. That's like virtue signaling. I don't know. Like it's pushing their own values. And so maybe the danger of being too woke is that you start to appeal to people who think in a similar way, but don't understand that they're under the influence of all these societal things. So maybe it's unavoidable is sort of the thing I'm suggesting. Maybe, the stronger personalities who have a better sense of their identity will end up being the ones that share their identity and put it out there for other people to follow. Leaders and followers, right? Just a classic split.
Yeah, and while we say all this, we should also recognize that we have many identities that have been kind of fed to us and that we've very gladly accepted, many for like our benefit. Like we are pretty, we ended up as med students, as sons of Korean immigrants to Canada. So that's a pretty well packaged and easy to consume, maybe not easy, but readily packaged instant identity to consume, and we've adopted that, and to a degree it makes life a lot easier, just knowing that you are a medical student. And then once you further identify, oh, I want to be a merge doc, I want to be a psychiatrist, then those are all great, like formal established identities passed down that we've adopted. But yeah, you're right. There's a danger of just accepting blindly, and when identities needs to shift and values need to change, then you really need that like leadership to demonstrate that this new identity or this new way of interacting and doing things works in the world. When you prove that, then you get other people will follow. Example being Steve Jobs. Example being what's his name? Paul Farmer, Jim Yong Kim, and Partners in Health. So yeah, like if you have some different thought and you think what you're doing can work in the world, then it's your job to pursue that.
On that note, let's talk about stubbornness. So this week I encountered something. So one of my friends are having some relationship problems. So there's a guy and a girl, and this sort of spurred because of some incident. So the guy was sort of annoyed by this other girl, and his girlfriend sort of caught on to that. And how the guy, this is going to be really hard to explain without saying names. All right, I'm gonna start over. Okay, right. So there's a dude and there's a girl.
Dude and girl.
The dude talks to another girl.
All right, that is not his girlfriend.
That is not his girlfriend. That sort of annoys him and ticks him off.
Yep.
So the dude gets annoyed, tells his girlfriend, she's being a beep. Yeah. And the girlfriend reacts to this saying, why do you care so much? Like, why are you so annoyed?
Yeah.
Are you interested in that other girl?
Yeah.
And the dude's of course saying, no, like that's not it at all. I'm just insulted. I'm just annoyed. I'm hurt essentially by this other girl. But his girlfriend thinks that that's a show of interest.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have two different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Two different ways of thinking about the same issue. Now, the way that my friend who knows these people explained it to me was that this conflict has been brewing for like a week, and they wouldn't stop talking about the same thing, despite the fact that both of them are trying to explain their own sort of idea, and like neither of them are really conceding to the other person.
Uh-huh.
So there's a serious case of stubbornness on both ends.
Yeah.
So the maybe the question is, when you have two different perspectives and two different sort of ways of thinking, how do you compromise between those two? And how do you compromise, especially when, let's say, one of them is thinking through emotion and maybe not the most rational way, and the other is trying to be reasonable, but is not explaining things properly or in a way that is rational to the other person?
Right.
How do you remediate that?
Mm. Wow. I didn't
This is
expect
some
it.
relationship counseling here.
Yeah, yeah, wow, this is cool. Not that I am any kind of expert or anything, but
I want to hear your opinion.
with my limited knowledge from the two books that I read, right? So, like, as soon as you mentioned that, um, the in response to the dude, the girlfriend was like, "Oh, are you interested in her?" No, you can see, okay, there's something more like underneath there.
Mm-hmm.
So like in that small phrase, you can detect a kind of like, is there a kind of jealousy? Is there a kind of insecurity about the guy's attraction towards her? Like there's all these probably underlying kind of emotional tensions and conflicts that have not been resolved, and it's just manifesting as this one sentence. So when she says, "Oh, like, are you interested?" It's not just a question of um, like, do you like that girl? Like it's not a literal statement. It's like a more of an emotional, like, alarm, right? As you could say, like, have you lost interest in me for some reason?
Mm.
Why are things not the same, right? You gotta explore the sub communication that people are sending, especially, I think with a lot of women, let's say, and I can't really say this authoritatively.
Yeah,
I,
go on.
I'm no expert, but people who think in more emotional ways or communicate through like emotional subtexts, right? So you really got to explore that and try to get to the bottom of that. But this guy, let's say this dude, who is replying like in a defensive way, like, no, I'm not interested in that girl. Like, why would that annoy me? So like that might signal to me that, okay, maybe this dude's problem is that he's not really in touch with his emotional self, right? So like even if it was the case that he had like slight feelings towards the girl, he might not be able to recognize that in himself, or if he did, kind of lie to himself conveniently through a rationalization with something like, that girl is so annoying, right? Where the source of the annoyment could have been like, I want to show interest in this girl, but she doesn't seem to reciprocate, like something like that.
Mm.
I don't know the situation, but so there's a need for kind of a balancing there. So if the dude could be a little more cognizant of his emotional state, um, and like comfortable with it, maybe, and like try to really explore the tension, like, of that, like, oh, why am I like attracted towards this other person? Like, what do I see in them, or that I'm like lacking, or that I feel that I lack from my current partner? Like those are like very vulnerable like issues that can take a lot of time and energy to work through. It can be convenient to be like, oh, that person's annoying, but at the root of it, that's not going to be the main issue. And for the girl, if she could also explore that subtext and here bring it to a more rational, more, let's say, articulated form, say that I've been noticing that I've felt as though that you haven't been giving me as much attention lately, and I feel jealous when I see you with other girls, regardless of whether you're interested in them or not. That's how I feel. Like, so, there's both of them could work to balance and understand, like, each other, because
Right.
they're two fundamental different strategies of like kind of understanding the world, more through like an emotional lens and more through like through a rational lens.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if I was. I don't know. Being a couples therapist or counselor would be really damn hard. But I think the like underlying like psychological development that has to happen there is something like that.
Right. And I think it's really interesting because maybe I led this question a bit, but like a lot of times we talk about women as being like emotional thinkers and men as being rational thinkers. And I don't know how much evidence there is behind that. It seems like, all the old men you talk to, they agree that that's the case. I've never really had a good like female perspective on that. My friend who was telling me about these two is actually also a girl, and she did see both sides, but did end up sort of siding with the girlfriend, saying, it was kind of not. It was, I don't know if impolite or inappropriate. It was inappropriate for the guy to sort of say it in the way he did, in terms of like why would he bring up that he's annoyed by this other girl in the first place? That was sort of the reasoning. Like, why was that such a big issue to him? And supposedly, like he had made it a pretty big issue. And I think what that did was it signaled to the girlfriend, like, this is more than just simple annoyance. This is like, there's something there. And that to them was rational. That was reasoning, because it pulled from evidence that, it still pulls from evidence, maybe not necessarily like situational or a situational evidence, but evidence in terms of like social evidence. Like, when a person talks a lot about something, like it's a sort of a expression of interest, whether or not it's distaste or it's like a positive interest. So that to me was interesting, that became the sort of underlying fact base for which these conclusions are built. So all to say, is that really emotional thinking, or is it sort of a rational thinking of a different kind that incorporates different sorts of evidence? That's hard to know. And I feel like that's something that a lot of guys don't understand. And I'm sure like girls also don't understand the other way around, where, if we were to completely rely on situational evidence, considering the fact that the girlfriend didn't actually know what the guy actually felt, right? Like, we don't know. Like, maybe he was interested, like you said, maybe he was interested the whole time, but on the surface level, it seems like he's not at fault at all, because he didn't make any moves or anything.
Yeah. I mean, like, one thing to say is, like, we see what we expect to see or want to see in the world, or we see, right? So our perception of things is dictated mostly by our expectations. Because this is like a major point in terms of like the neuroscience of how we perceive the world. If
Mhm.
we were to have to like, you know, interpret like from bottom up every single piece of information that is coming to us, like from all possible different angles, then we would be something like tripping all the time, like tripping balls all the time. There's way too much information to handle. So
Right.
how our brain manages that load is by creating well-packaged expectations of what we expect to see in the world, like compresses it, and then really literally changes the world we see around us, like based on what we expect to see. So
Right.
if that girl there expected that, like based on her like current emotional state, or an emotional state based on maybe jealousy or maybe insecurity, then what she will see in that behavior, like literally see, you know, as like a gripping, and in the sense that, oh, that has to be the case, that has to be true. She will see her boyfriend and interpret her boyfriend's actions as something like, oh, he's showing interest in that other girl. And like that may have an element of truth to it. Like we don't know. We can't like go into the psyche of that dude and
Mhm.
I don't know, figure it out. But however, you know, whatever degree of truth that was, you know, the girl in that situation will interpret that as being most true, as being most resonant with her current emotional state. And so, you know, how do you tease, then how do you really tease out like what's really true? Well, I don't know. In that situation, there's probably a number of truths at play, right? There, like probably like some fraction of the guy will have maybe an interest. Maybe if you like really, really, really think about it, maybe if you like really didn't like that person at some level, there's like a slight potential, let's say, of interest in that girl. So from some perspectives, like that might be true. But if you can kind of change your values and the way you see someone in a different way, then kind of different truths about them will manifest.
Mhm.
Right? So if you can see that person as someone who is trustworthy, someone who is honest, and when I like approach them, they will reveal like the truth to me, and like in a good way. Like if you approach with that frame of mind, then you can interpret that information as, well, I don't really know what's going on. Let's
Mm.
let's ask him. And when you ask him, you'll like act in a spirit of, you'll be manifesting, you know, what you feel about and what you think about that person. So instead of being like why did you talk to her? It'll be something like, hey babe, like I was wondering, like, you know, what upsets you so much about her, like, you know, and that can reveal very different truths from like one situation
Mhm.
based on the values and perception you bring to a situation, right? And I think that's like such a cool phenomenon. Like that's another expression of that is the self-fulfilling prophecy. So, you know, that's a very well documented like psychological phenomenon where if you think that like, oh, I'm such a loser at this party, or have some kind of belief, like you will manifest that, and other people seeing what you manifest will react in, you know, that way, thus confirming your self-generated belief that like, yes, I am such a loser, nobody wants to talk to me. It's a
Right.
very like quickly degrading cycle, but that like that's the power that like shifting a perspective and learning to embody a different value or perspective can have. Like it literally changes how you interact with others and how others interact with you. So in those situations, although it can be really difficult, you really want to recognize and break that pattern of jealousy and mistrust,
Mm.
and try to bring forth a different kind of truth from the other person, and invite their best selves
Mm.
instead of their most, kind of jealous, whiny selves to come forward. And maybe, treated in that way, the guy might respond, you know what? Yeah, like maybe I have this like long history with this girl. Like, I liked her before. Like, it's really complicated. But so maybe that was coming up again. But like, I know that like, I won't bring her up again, and I'm gonna like focus. I'm dedicated to this relationship. Blah blah blah. Something
Ideal. Yeah.
something more mature could happen.
Yeah.
Not saying that it does, but it's not impossible, and it shouldn't be unreasonable to expect from like mature people, and that would be a sign of emotional competence.
I think it's a lot more rare than you can hope for. I'll be honest, and I feel like this is why it's like 50% of marriages end in divorce, right? Like people don't end up figuring this out, and I think you put it beautifully when you said like you have to see this other person as someone you can trust and someone who will tell the truth when you ask them a question. And I think that perspective breaks down over time, like with small injuries, like small lies that happen, or when you start to lose faith in someone. So trust is the most fundamental and foundational aspect of any relationship, I suppose. And yeah, like we need a reminder that we need to take on that perspective when we want to make the relationship work. There's also the alternative that you just don't want the relationship to happen, in which case no amount of perspective changing is going to really change how you perceive things. Like you could try, but I think when the goal is lost, then the attitude also follows. So yeah.
Cool.
That's really cool. I think that's something we can extrapolate to a lot of things. Actually, perspective. I haven't thought about perspective in a very long time.
Yeah.
So
your perspective changes the way. No, just changes your world.
Yeah.
Changes your world.
Quite simply, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Good. Close it off there. Do you have?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end off. Yeah.
Another fun footnote.
Good perspective. Good conclusion here. Okay. Let's just cut it there. All right.
All right.
Thanks all for listening, and hopefully you can go and test out your perspectives too, and keep an open mind as we travel through this uncertain world together. And that doesn't really sum up the podcast, but bye.
Bye.